In the Hearts of Men by Prosser 132, Chapter 2, Nature. Jack held off the blizzard of 68 and then disappeared. He didn't plan it that way, there was a lot to deal with. He'd been alone for so long, isolated even from the people who could see him, that it felt like being punched in the face, having been shown some kindness. It felt awful, which was weird, and Jack being Jack, he had to take some time to process it. He spent 2 winters in Asia just trying to puzzle it out. Then 70 rolled around, and he had to stop another blizzard attempt in the States, which annoyed the hell out of him. For one, somehow 68 had gotten blamed on him anyway. For 2, the fight he'd gotten in over the blizzard attempt had been brutal but irritatingly necessary. The winter sprites that had followed the European settlers over to America were considerably more wary around him now, and he didn't bother the native spirits. They'd had nothing to do with it, and he valued his skin, thanks. Sometimes Jack wondered why he wasn't like the other European spirits. He had to be one, because he certainly wasn't one of the native spirits. They treated him like the interloper he was. He didn't blame them, he didn't belong there the way they did. His first memories were of his lake, but that didn't mean the lake had belonged to him first. They treated him much more nicely than the other European spirits, since even now they had this awful idea that because they'd come over and conquered, that the land was theirs. Jack didn't think the land was his. Nothing was his. That was Jack Frost, always on the wind, always with the snow, always in the way or out of place. That was okay. It had always been that way. The native spirits were nice enough in their ways, but they were distant. They hadn't helped with the fight, even though Jack broke his right collarbone and his left arm. But they hadn't helped the sprites, so Jack would take it. But the European spirits hated him! He was too nice, they'd taunt, too soft. Playing games in the snow with kids was for children, and children were for eating. Jack tried not to hate things. He made an exception for European winter sprites. Especially when they tried to mess with Easter for the second time. 70 was when he admitted to himself that he should probably take the Easter Bunny up on that 2-year-old invitation. It was too coincidental in his opinion. Twice attacking at the same time of year, twice around kids. Sure, maybe a lot of the Guardians were sort of standoffish, but if there was even a chance that the sprites were trying to target large numbers of children, Jack kind of felt responsible. It wasn't him who was a child eater, but he'd be damned if he just let it happen. People who looked away when bad things happened could be just as culpable as the people who did the bad things, in his opinion. He waited until late summer, when the guy would probably have some free time, before heading south. Jack would be the first to admit that he had no idea what the Guardians did with their spare time, but hell, Easter was successfully passed, and if he was busy, Jack could just try again, right? He'd never bothered going to Australia. Wasn't a lot of snow. He'd stopped by New Zealand once, though, and it had been a pretty neat place. He swept by and dusted the mountaintops for old time's sake. Of course, once he hit the actual continents, he realized he had no idea where he was even supposed to look. After all, he'd only known to get this far because the Easter Bunny had told him so. He'd not even known the guy was from around here. He took his time exploring a bit, at least. Ayers Rock was cool. He liked the sound of its original name better, though. It was more fun to say. There was coral in the ocean and thousands of miles of brush, swamps, and rivers, and... well, he was enjoying himself. It was kind of a lonely place if you weren't near the cities, and cooler than he'd thought it would be for August. Well, maybe that was due to being south of the equator. South America had been colder in the summer months, the few times he'd ventured that south. Now that he thought about it, he thought maybe he could see why people liked it so much. There were a fair number of European spirits here, though not any winter ones, and it sort of annoyed Jack. He didn't try to talk to them. He could see the way they acted, and it was just like the European spirits in North America. They thought they owned the place. Jack wanted to shout, to say that no one owned anything, but since he was just as alien here as he was in North America, he stayed away. Seemed safer. He found a pond he liked. He liked ponds, he wasn't sure why, and spent 2 days there. It was September now, and he thought of the pond he hung around back home, the way he'd start frosting the grass around its edges by now. Idly, he dipped the end of his staff into the water, sending brief curls of ice over the surface that melted almost before they were done forming. "Oi, what are you—" "Oh!" Jack started, surprised to hear a voice, and spun around. Behind him, looking as surprised as he felt, was the Easter Bunny, just as tall and gray and furred as he remembered, which, of course he was. 2 years wasn't very long at all in the lifespan of a spirit. Jack felt like an idiot. Wondered when you would show up, the Easter Bunny said, relaxing a little. I'd appreciate if you didn't go around ashing things over. Spring's just about here, you know. Sorry, Jack said, horribly awkward. He hadn't known, but then he guessed it was pretty rude. Sorry. No mind, the Easter Bunny said, eyes flicking up and around. Struth, you look about ready to bolt. Calm yourself, yeah? Jack felt himself go red, horribly warm in the face. Yeah, he said, looking away. Great, way to look like a goddamn moron. Thought you didn't show up earlier, the Easter Bunny said. Oh, never. You finally came for me jogging, I see. He sounded so self-satisfied that Jack couldn't help his snort. Actually, he said, looking back, the guy looks so offended. If he was as high-strung as Jack was starting to suspect he was, this was going to be fun. I'm here to talk to you, but, if you're offering free food, I'm not going to turn you down. The Easter Bunny blinked at him, visibly torn between his imagined slight or sinking back into satisfaction. Oh, yeah, Jack was going to have fun with this guy. But first, Jack said, grinning widely at the Easter Bunny's confusion, you never actually gave me your name? Unless it's actually Easter Bunny, in which case I'm going to have to call you something else the way I'm saying that all day. The Easter Bunny puffed up. Of course it's not your Darrow, he said with utmost dignity. Easter Bunnymund. Pleased to meet you. Jack waited a second. 2. The Easter Bunny began to deflate a little. So, your name is literally Easter Bunny, Jack said, drawing out the words, not bothering to hide his delight. Oh my god, that's amazing! It was my name long before the holiday got it. Easter Bunnymund huffed, ears twitching in what had to be annoyance. Yeah, maybe, but it's also longer than Easter Bunny, Jack pointed out pleasantly, so I'm just going to call you Bunny, okay? Bunny, thus named, rolled his eyes. It might as well as what everyone else calls me. Jack frowned and resolved to come up with as many annoying versions of Bunny as he could, even hoping for a splutter at least. What do you need to talk to me about? Bunny asked, getting over himself, eyeing Jack speculatively. There was a harder gleam to his eyes now, all business, and Jack's spine straightened under it without his permission. Did you know there was almost another blizzard this year? Jack asked, watching Bunny's face for a response. His brows came down, his eyes narrowed, and his ears began to slowly tick down flat. I took care of it, Jack said, waving a hand carelessly. It had been easier a second time. But it was the same time of year, same area, all up and down the East Coast. Blizzards happen, Bunny said mildly, but his mouth was tight. Good, he was taking it seriously. Something that had been tense in Jack for months now went lax. We're sure to talk about this in the open, he said, and tapped his foot on the red-brown earth. A tunnel opened to his side. Are you all right with small spaces? He asked suddenly, looking at Jack with narrowed eyes. Yeah, fly. Jack shrugged, though something had gone a little funny in his stomach when he thought of the earth closing above him, the dark span of tunnels beneath the earth. I should be okay, he said, and flashed a grin that was more steady than he felt. I promise not to frost everything over if it's over in 5 minutes. Bunny nodded, still watching him. All right, in you get, he said gruffly, and Jack tried to walk more confidently than he ever had, to jump down into the dark and not panic. Only it wasn't dark. Jack landed in a crouch, unsure of if he'd only dropped 10 feet, or if there had been some kind of magic involved and he was much deeper in the earth. But all thoughts of how it worked were gone from him once he got a good look around him. Everywhere was moss and thriving plants, soft beneath his feet and climbing the walls, and sunlight. How was there sunlight beneath the ground? He thought with awe. Broke through from unseen places to shine warmly on flowers and stones. Bunny dropped down beside him and gave him a strange look. You sure you're all right? He asked. Yeah, I'm fine, Jack replied, a little too quickly and a little too breathless. Bunny kept looking at him. It doesn't look like how I thought it would, Jack added, hoping to try and make it make sense. Bunny's face did a weird thing where it softened a bit, and he shrugged, clearly no longer concerned. If you say so, he said, and jerked his thumb to his right toward more of the sunlight. Follow me. He took off, transitioning smoothly from a two-legged balance to a four-legged sprint, and Jack followed, the wind supporting him a bit and letting him keep up. That earned Jack another glance, and though Jack was a little confused as to how the wind was blowing below the earth, he just shrugged back. He sure as hell didn't have an answer. After about 3 minutes, they broke into the greenest place Jack had ever seen in his life. He had to work to keep his jaw closed and managed, he thought, to stay collected when Bunny said with a sweep of a paw, "This is a warren." "Cool," Jack said, trying to keep his eyes in his head instead of letting them dart around and stare at everything at once. "I like it," he said after a moment, and then wondered if he'd imagined the tiny relaxing of Bunny's ears. "So, a blizzard, you say?" Bunny prompted, taking a seat on one of the various boulders about. Jack perched on the one beside it, his staff dangling from his fingers. "Yeah," Jack nodded, "and I couldn't find the sprites who did it last time, but I sniffed them out this time." He wondered for a moment if Bunny would believe him. He knew 68 hadn't been him, but the only other person who would tell the truth hadn't said a word, and it was everywhere. Jack Frost had ruined Easter. He wondered why Bunny hadn't said anything when he'd seemed to believe Jack when they'd first met. Or maybe he hadn't believed him in the first place. That could explain it. Jack didn't bother being mad about it. He got blamed no matter what happened. So long as Bunny believed him this time, he didn't care. "You did?" Bunny looked over at him, and Jack was relieved to see that he at least looked sincere. "How'd that go?" "A broken collarbone and left arm, but I don't think they'll try again for a while." Jack shrugged. "I'll keep an eye out, though." Bunny stared at him. "What?" "You're right. Should you be moving around?" Jack stared back. Yeah? I'm fine, why?" Jack had no idea what was going on, but Bucky was looking steadily more alarmed. "You're fine," Bunny repeated. "Are you sure?" "A clavicle fracture isn't a small thing, mate. Is your shoulder still sore?" "It was fine after a few weeks," Jack said, thinking he'd figured it out. "I heal fast, it's good." "Did anyone said it?" Bunny demanded, increasingly agitated. "Did anyone even look at them?" Jack was back to square one. "Oh, no, I said it. It's fine. Seriously, you're weirding me out." Bunny was starting to look angry. "You said it yourself! Oh, you might! What if you said it wrong? How'd you set them if your arm was broken too?" "It's not that hard. It was a clean break, and the arm was only like a crack," Jack protested. "What's wrong? It's not that big a deal." "Yes, it is!" Bunny snapped. Then paused, seemingly trying to control himself. "Look, Jack," he said flatly, eyes closed and ears tight to his head. "Next time you get in a scrape that bad, knock 3 times on the ground. You could have gotten killed." Jack shrugged. "Yeah, that happens to people," he said. "Not sure what knocking on the ground's gonna do, Cottontail." And it twitched. "That nail was a keeper." "It'll let me know where you are." Bunny bit out, visibly roaring with his irritation. "I owe you one. If you're hurt, let me know." Jack froze. "What?" he said after a long moment. "I said I owe you one," Bunny repeated, irritation winning out in the way his ears glitched and his eyes narrowed. "Yeah, but..." Jack started trying to make sense of this. "Why?" "Because you saved me holiday," Bunny said, looking away again. "And did you even try to go to anyone else your raging own? Or did you think it'd be a lark setting your own bones?" Jack flinched. "There, isn't anyone to go to," he admitted, staring down at his lap and wishing he could make that sound less pathetic. "I'm not really friends with anyone. So, Also, this whole gratitude thing was new, but Jack wasn't going to say that. Sure, it wasn't an out-and-out thank you, but it was more important than 2 words anyway. There was silence, and Jack didn't dare look over, sure that Bunny had to be feeling just as awkward as Jack. Sorry?" "Not your problem, don't worry about it," Jack said with a shrug, still not looking. "Anyway, more importantly, blizzard. Attempted blizzard. Child endangerment. Seemed like the kind of thing a guardian should know about, but, I've got it handled, so I'm kind of wasting your time telling you about something that didn't happen in the first place, and..." "You could throw the ears of a cookie, you could," Bunny said, cutting through. "Look,
No, it doesn't mean much, but you can try to relax. I'm not going to throw you out on your ear. Most spirits wouldn't say a thing, especially winter spirits, since they tend to be a nasty lot anyway.
It was true, Jack thought so himself, but he couldn't stop the tiny flinch. He was a winter spirit too, and not one currently well liked in the world.
Bunny sighed. Sorry, it's rude of me to say,
he said. Jack's hands twisted around and around his staff palms, following familiar whorls and ridges in the wood, like it was another hand's fingerprints. He hated this. He should have just left a note, maybe.
I'm not good at talking to people.
Jack looked up at that, startled to see Bunny watching him sheepishly. That makes no sense, he said slowly. You're the Easter Bunny. Kids love you.
Bunny rolled his eyes. Being good with kids is a little different from being good with other people, he said. Not that kids aren't people, mind ya, but they're a lot more forgiving. Bunny frowned. That's a lie. They're a lot harsher, but that helps. Kids are a mess all over the place in what they do. Makes them more predictable.
Jack agreed. Kids couldn't see him, had no idea he was there, but he'd played with them in his own invisible way for centuries now. He knew kids like he knew his own heartbeat. It's everyone else who doesn't make sense.
Exactly, Bunny hummed, looking relieved. If you never know what a kid's going to do, you're ready for most anything. Everyone else has set ways they work and an awful habit of not keeping to them at the exact wrong moment.
Jack nodded. So, he said after a long, weirdly companionable silence that made his skin crawl. How do I get out of here? Not that this place isn't cool, but messages delivered and all that. I should be getting... Can't say home. It's not my home. I don't have one. Back!
What? Sorry,
Bunny said, hopping back down to the ground. Jack leapt down to the space beside him.
Follow me, I'll get you back to the surface.
They only spent a few seconds in the tunnels before Bunny opened the passage to the world above.
I was serious before, he said flatly, looking at Jack, ears tilted forward. If you're in trouble, give the other 3 knocks. I'll be there as soon as I can.
You've got it, Bun, Jack said, and grinned at the scowl. That counts!
It's Bunny Gadero.
It's hilarious is what it is, Jack replied, then paused. I'll, let you know if it happens again. The blizzard thing, I mean.
You'll do that.
Bunny nodded and snapped his fingers. Were they still fingers if they were on a pot, I wondered?
Before I forget.
He fished something out from one of the pockets on the belt he wore slung over his shoulders and tossed it to Jack, who caught it fumblingly.
I'm very good at got some people's favorites, he said with a smile. You'll have to let me know.
Yeah, Jack said, surprised. He had forgotten entirely about the chocolate thing. When did he even get that? Or was it some kind of magic pocket thing? Jack was pretty sure he didn't want to know, actually. So, well, thanks. Then he couldn't take it any longer and let the wind sweep him up back into the sky that wasn't his, but where he belonged. Later, floating over the Pacific, drifting east, he bit into the egg-shaped chocolate nervously. It was a rich, dark chocolate, thicker shelled than he'd thought it would be, and filled with some kind of whipped center. It was coconut, he thought with surprise, but not that weird, grainy, textured stuff, and with the faintest touch of peppermint. It was good, but it wasn't his favorite. Grinning a little to himself at the thought of the furious frown that would produce, he resolved to tell the oversized rabbit. It'd be a laugh. Maybe he'd never like Jack or believe him fully. Jack didn't blame him. But Jack was pretty sure that he could make himself useful, and that was more important anyway. Jack relaxed into the wind's hold and let himself grin. Aster waited until the kid was long gone before closing the tunnel and promptly slumped down a bit, taking a deep breath. Sun and stars that had taken more out of him than he'd thought it would. The past 2 years had gone by with no word of a Jack Frost, save for a spiteful little whisper once in a while, and for a moment he'd entertained the notion that the boy had disappeared entirely. Sometimes it happened. Winter spirits got into fights all the time. By year count, they could be some of the shortest-lived spirits of them all. Then he'd recalled how the bloke had dispelled a blizzard that had covered most of the roughly 500,000 square clicks of the state's east coast, and dismissed that thought entirely. No way the kid had just died off, not if he was kicking around that much power. Still, he'd been more relieved than he thought he'd be when he realized the stranger poking around the GAFA was the kid. Was Jack, he corrected in his head. Who knew how old he really was? Then the news Jack had come to bring him, and then letting a person into his warping!
He'd had to! News like that wasn't for just anyone to hear. But even though he'd been preparing himself 2 years now to let someone inside... Another deep breath. It was good. It was over, and he could probably handle it again. Not for very long, maybe, but over time, he won't be back, he said aloud to himself, voice hushed as though Jack could hear him. He was about ready to dig his way out. He ignored the part of his brain that wanted to remind him of the odd way Jack had looked around, the quite hunching into himself when Aster offered to help him, the surprise on his face when Aster had given him the jockey. He made the flavor last year and carried one on him most days, just in case. Aster stood alone in his warren, relieved, but also disquieted.